Welcome to the Tim Lauer Podcast, where we talk about all things small business, real estate, politics, local and national. Let's get right into it. We're here with Kristi Hagood, running for Circuit Court Judge. Welcome, Kristi.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You're a mom raising kids out here in our community with 25 years as a prosecutor handling child abuse, elder exploitation, and white-collar crime. What personal moment made you decide the bench, not just the DA's office, is how we keep our families safe?
Well, because being a prosecutor in the courtroom, trying felony cases, I realized how important the judge is in the courtroom. The judge sets the tone for the courtroom. The judge is like an umpire. Instead of balls and strikes, they decide what evidence comes in, what evidence stays out. They make those big decisions, and knowing how important that is, when a new judgeship came to Baldwin County, I felt like I had to step up and put my name out there because whoever takes the bench in place 7 needs to have the right experience. And because of all of my background, I think I'm that person.
Awesome. So how important is this position?
I think it's extremely important. There was a study done a few years ago that showed that Baldwin County needed additional judgeships because of the population growth. And so there were 3 new judgeships that were awarded, one for family court, that currently is Judge Kemp, one for district court, that's Judge Michael Hoyt, and then this was the last of those 3 to do general civil and general criminal cases at the circuit level. And there's been an additional study done since then saying we really need even more than that. So to keep up with the demand in our judicial system, I think it's very important.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about what the circuit court judge does and they're responsible for.
Okay, so in this particular one, it is general civil and general criminal, and it differs from the circuit judges who do family court. Okay, so for general civil, it's going to handle civil disputes where the amount of money involved is $20,000 or above. It could involve both bench trials, which means the judge is the finder of the fact, or jury trials, depending on what the parties request. On the criminal side, once felony cases are indicted, they then handle felony criminal cases that are set for trial, and this includes your murders, your sexual assaults, your robberies, your higher level thefts, and death penalty cases, anything where the punishment could be a year and a day up to life in prison without parole and the death penalty. So it's wide ranging, but on the more serious criminal cases.
Gotcha. So take me through some of the experience you have that led you up to this point.
Okay, well, I guess we have to go way, way back. So I went to law school because I wanted to be a criminal prosecutor. I had worked as a reporter, as summer newspaper reporter for the Birmingham News when I was in college.
Nice.
Thought maybe I'd be on the news or something someday.
Okay.
But instead, while I was covering cases, I saw how oftentimes children were the victim of crime. And I have a passion for children and for families, and so I made the decision that I wanted to go to law school to become a prosecutor.
Nice.
So my first job out of law school, I worked for the Alabama Attorney General's office. So the Attorney General's office, I was assigned to the Criminal Appeals Division. Basically, that means that when somebody has been convicted of a crime, they've been sentenced to prison, they're trying to appeal that conviction to the appellate courts, and so I would respond on behalf of the state and then argue those cases in front of the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals. And then after a year, they moved me into the Capital Litigation Division, where I was doing the same thing but on death penalty cases. And so I was arguing in front of the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals and the Alabama Supreme Court. And the thing about doing appellate cases that's really helpful to your experience is you learn all the mistakes that can be made. You end up having to do a lot of legal research. So you get really, really steeped in the law. And so that was really good for experience. But after that, I got married. My husband was doing his medical training in Louisiana. He did his internal medicine residency at Earl K. Long in Baton Rouge. So we moved to Louisiana. I take the Louisiana bar, and I went to work for the Louisiana Attorney General's office. And while I was there, I was in their criminal division doing trial work and appellate work all over the state of Louisiana. So, and I joke about this, but it's true. I mean, literally was trying everything from selling crawfish without a license to first-degree murder.
Oh, wow.
So I worked on a wide range of cases at the trial level and the appellate level. And then in doing that, I was in front of a lot of different judges. And so you see a lot of different judicial styles in addition to just getting more experience in front of juries and that sort of thing. We moved to Shreveport for my husband's fellowship in gastroenterology. And at this point, we had a baby, and I needed a desk job. So I actually went to work as a staff attorney for the Louisiana Second Circuit Court of Appeal. Basically, what that meant was I was working for appellate judges and as a staff attorney. So I was working in a neutral position at this point. So I would read the trial transcripts, and I would read the state's brief, and I would read the defendant's brief, and I would draft an opinion for the judges to review. So having that experience as working as a neutral, I think is great preparation for the office I'm running for.
Oh, sure.
Right now. Well, then we moved back to Alabama because we wanted to get closer to our family. And so once we did that, we first started off in Montgomery, and I was teaching at the law school at Jones School of Law. I taught 3 semesters of legal research and writing. And what I think was really helpful about that is no lawyer or no judge knows all of the law. Like if you go into a law library, it's huge because you have 50 different states and federal law. They all have their statutes, they all have their case law, they have their administrative regulations. And so my job at the law school was to teach students how to find the law, how to read the law, how to apply the law. And that's what judges have to be able to do. Because again, nobody knows all of the law. So that was really helpful. And then we moved to Baldwin County in 2009. We moved here with a 4-year-old daughter, and our family grew while we were here. But I went back to work for the Alabama Attorney General's office again, doing the death penalty cases again. I could do most of my work from home, but then travel to Montgomery when I needed to argue cases.
Gotcha.
When DA Wilters took office in 2017, I went to work for the Baldwin County DA's office. Wow. And so from that point, I've been doing child abuse cases. That includes child physical abuse, sexual abuse, internet crimes against children, chemical endangerments. He needed me to start a unit devoted to elder abuse, financial exploitation of the elderly, and financial crimes. So I dove into that. Then I'm back doing both. I'm really doing all of it right now. But how that has prepared me is I've been in front of juries in Baldwin County for since 2017.
Wow.
And I think that, the rules of evidence are basically something I have to live off of. And I think that just gives me great experience for being a judge in the courtroom.
Yeah, it sounds like you bring a lot of experience to the table.
Yeah, I'd like to think so.
Hope you're enjoying the Tim Lauer podcast so far. We talk about all things small business, real estate, politics, local and national issues that affect you most. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to drop a comment below. I read and reply to each and every one. Now let's get back to it. What's one of the toughest cases you've been a part of?
Oh, gosh. Well, on the child sexual abuse cases, they're all really, really hard. There's no such thing as a good sexual assault. They just range from bad to worse. As far as some of the hardest, of course, I can't talk names.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
We have had, there was a case that came out, it's even hard to pick one, but there's probably the one that had the longest sentence I ever got. Actually started with a SRO at a local school who was teaching a class on bullying. And 2 students came to her and said, well, what happens if the bully is a parent? And they said that their friend came to school with bruises from his stepfather. So she pulled the student aside, and he said, well, yeah, I don't have any bruises on me today, but my little brother does. And the little brother, when they pulled him aside and he pulled up his shorts underneath, it was just solid purple. What happened was the school had a meeting with the mother to talk about his speech impediment, and they thought she was joking when she said, "Oh, he doesn't need therapy, he needs a beating." Well, she wasn't joking. And her boyfriend beat him with a belt at least 27 times because the older brother was counting the licks. And so all three children were pulled from the home, and there was nobody safe for them to go home with. So a school teacher actually took them home. And what happens when there are allegations of abuse, the children go to the Child Advocacy Center for a forensic interview where they're interviewed by a person who's trained in extracting information from children in a developmentally appropriate way. Of course, we want to avoid asking any kind of leading questions. And when she interviewed the female child in the family, the female child wound up disclosing horrific sexual abuse that had been taking place over the course since she was 5 years old. And because, and the jury convicted him of sodomy in the first degree, 2 counts, and because we could prove that she was below the age of 6 when it happened and that he was above the age of 21, the judge had to sentence him to life without parole.
Wow.
And so at least I can guarantee that those children will not be abused by that person and that that person will never abuse anybody else. So that was definitely, that was a hard one. I bet I've had others.
Yeah.
I've had, one thing that I had to learn in my first trial was you have to get your emotions in check. My husband says he thinks that to do my job, I've had to separate myself from the horror of it at times.
Sure.
Because you can't cry in the courtroom.
Yeah.
If you cry in the courtroom, you're going to get a mistrial, and your victim's going to have to do it all over again. And your victim is talking about the hardest thing that's ever happened to them.
Yeah.
And you have to be strong for them. You have to help. You have to be there. Because when I put a child on the witness stand, I'll have the child, there'll be a court reporter, and then me. And I try to stay as close to them as I can. And I have to encourage them to continue on. And I can't, so I've had to learn to keep it buttoned up so that I can do the job.
Yeah. It's got to be tough to be able to do that and then go home and try to, spend time with your family or go out to dinner.
Well,
How do you balance it?
I'm really good at compartmentalization,
Okay.
but my family is my therapy. I remember there was a case that I had one day listening to the victim really disclose, and it was an adult victim disclosing what happened to her as a child. I wanted to go home and dry clean my brain. But going home and having pizza and movie and hanging out with my kids and my husband, that's the best therapy. It really is.
Family is so important.
It is.
In any position in yours, it's amazing, but even as a business owner, to support a home group, but that's so true. With crime rising, how do you sentence repeat violent offenders to actually deter them?
Well, so there are 2 things. The felony, you have sentencing guidelines. Okay, so by statute, you have your Class A felonies, your Class B, your Class C. And so let's take a Class B felony. The sentencing ranges between 2 to 20 years. But the judge can't just sentence them to whatever they want. Instead, there's this additional thing called sentencing guidelines, and it's based upon their past criminal history. Was a gun involved? Have they been on probation before? Have they served other sentences before? And then it comes up with a sentencing range that the judge has to follow, unless the state can allege and prove that there are circumstances that would justify going outside of the sentencing guidelines. I would like to see this statutorily. I would like to see the sentencing guidelines adjusted to give more time to our repeat property crime offenders, and
Sure,
I'll explain what I mean by that. Is you can have a case where somebody has stolen a large amount of money from somebody, and they're not, and if you follow the sentencing guidelines, then you can give them a suspended sentence with probation. And sometimes that feels very pitiful. But in order to adjust those sentencing guidelines, we actually have to build more prisons in the state of Alabama to make room for them. Because right now the priority is housing the violent offenders, as it should be if you have to prioritize.
That's right.
But I also think sentencing people according to the Habitual Felony Offender Act, and prosecutors making sure that they request that. In my cases, especially with my higher dollar financial crimes and my elder abuse and financial exploitation of the elderly, thankfully does not fall under the sentencing guidelines, so I can be a lot more aggressive on those. But for I think that prosecutors need to be more willing to ask judges to sentence outside of the guidelines when they can show circumstances that warrant it.
Gotcha. Absolutely. That would definitely help. What made you want to get into being a lawyer? Did you just wake up one day and said, or was there a story behind that?
The story behind it, well, okay, it sort of goes back to when I was at the Birmingham News that summer, but there were two specific cases. One is there was a baby that was grazed by a bullet. Well, it wasn't really grazed. I mean, the baby was shot by a stray bullet in a drive-by shooting in downtown Birmingham. And then the other was I was covering a child abuse case in the criminal courts. I was getting to cover the criminal beat for a reporter who was on vacation. And between those two things, the light bulb went off that this was what I was meant to do. I'm a fighter.
Yeah.
And it served me well as prosecutor. When I see something like that, I get mad. I want to get justice. But now as I've gotten older, it's not that I don't want to get justice. I still do. But I feel like I have the maturity to take that next step into the judiciary. I mean, clearly the defendant's constitutional rights have to be observed and protected. Absolutely.
Yep.
But the state of Alabama is also entitled to a fair trial, and so are victims. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I'm now in that position where I have maturity and I have the experience to where I can make that step over.
Gotcha.
And I also think it's a good transition because the goal of a prosecutor is justice. Okay, it's not just get a conviction for somebody for something. No, I mean, we have to look ourselves in the mirror. You want to make sure you have enough legal evidence to convict the right person for the offense that's been charged beyond a reasonable doubt. And so the wonderful thing about being a prosecutor is that the goal is justice, not just a conviction. It's not just about winning. And I think that transitions well into being a judge because, again, the goal is justice. And so I think that's another reason why I'm very well suited for it.
That's a great answer. Being you're going into a new position, how do you see yourself shaping that?
How do I see myself shaping it?
Yeah.
Well, I think that the current judges have a pretty good template. I'm not necessarily looking to go in and change everything.
Okay.
I mean, I think that our current judges do a good job of running their dockets. I will probably take some advice from all of them. I take advice. I'm probably going to beg for advice.
Okay.
In terms of how, because there will be a learning curve for whoever steps into that position. But I think that I do have some ideas of things, some things I've seen, like, for example, a lot of people don't realize this, but there's a fair amount of civil work that is done in the DA's office, and I've done a fair amount of that through civil asset forfeiture cases. So having sat through a lot of civil dockets, I like how the judges will let attorneys check in, estimate how long their matter will take, and then they take them in that order so that the people whose matters can be handled quickly can be, go ahead and get them in and out. The ones that are going to take longer, some of the judges allow attorneys to file status updates instead of having to come in person for everything. I think those are some really practical things on the civil side. On the criminal side, one thing I would definitely do, and I think part of this is because growing up, my dad sometimes had to work night shift. A lot of the standard thing that I have seen is the judges will take the cases that involve retained counsel first to get the lawyers in and out. And it's not that I wouldn't do that, but I would actually prioritize one group of people before that, and those are our law enforcement officers who had to work night shift.
That's right.
If someone has had to work all night and then come sit in court, I think we need to get them out the door first because they need to get some sleep so they can be safe when they go back out on their next night shift. And so that's one thing that I've seen that I think that I would do. And I guess that's, I have a heart for that.
Yeah, that
So.
sounds like a great idea.
Yeah.
Absolutely. How do courtroom decisions impact the business community?
Well, they definitely do because on, say, your civil side, it's from the lawyer side, let's say a plaintiff's lawyer, okay, to cover their bases. It's not unusual for them to basically add every party they can think of so that they don't accidentally leave out a party. However, I do think from the business side, the people who are getting sued, maybe they shouldn't be sued or maybe they should have been released from the lawsuit. I think that judges need to be a little bit more proactive on releasing people from lawsuits, once it becomes obvious, okay, this person really should not be part of this. That's one thing that I see. I know.
Take that burden off of them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then you have issues of summary judgment. There's a lot of, back and forth on should a summary judgment be granted, should it not be granted. I think that runaway verdicts can also be an issue. I'm not exactly sure how much impact the judge has on that, but those are things that do impact the business community. And I guess where I come from is my husband is a physician, and med malpractice lawsuits and that sort of thing. Even though that's not something I've professionally handled, it's certainly something that I've been around.
Gotcha. Trump made family safety priority one. How do you carry that America first, victim first justice to the circuit court bench?
Well, I think by primarily following the law. And so one of the things I can definitely speak to is the change that has occurred pre-Trump and post-Trump, especially in the second term. So we have a lot of, maybe I shouldn't say a lot, we have quite a few criminals that were not here legally. And so what has happened is they are now moving so fast. So let's say someone gets arrested. They are here illegally and ICE puts a hold on them. Okay, if they make their bond, okay, ICE just goes ahead and takes them and deports them. Now, on one hand, that certainly lightens my load.
Sure.
My only concern is if they deport them before we convict them, and then years later, if we don't make sure we strengthen our immigration laws, are they going to come back and be able to come back because I didn't convict them? But the only reason I didn't convict them was because they were deported before I could. So that it is an interesting situation that I hope that's taken care of legislatively. I think that, and of course, we still have people here that do need to be deported, but it seems like we're seeing less and less right now, and so I think that's a good thing.
Gotcha. Now you're in the race, running against an opponent. What differentiates you?
Well, I think probably the biggest thing is that I'm a criminal prosecutor and he's a criminal defense attorney.
Okay.
Let me clarify just for correction. He did work in the DA's office for a few years. There are quite a few people that will work in the DA's office. They'll learn the ropes and they'll go out and become criminal defense attorneys. And, that's fine. The system does need both.
Sure.
Absolutely. But this is the other thing that I think differentiates is oftentimes the defense attorney is about winning and the prosecutor is about justice. And so that's why I think coming from prosecution into the judiciary is a better transition.
Gotcha. Okay. And you running as the tough on crime.
Yes.
Yeah, all right. What makes you more tough on crime?
What makes me tough on crime? Well, because I already am.
Okay.
I think that's what makes me tough on crime. I mean, so I was explaining this to a group of forensics students at Baldwin Prep a few days ago. I was teaching a forensics class, and they were asking about plea deals. Okay, so if every case that was indicted went to trial, we would never get through them all. So just as a matter of practicality, there's a certain percentage of the cases that do have to plead so that we have the time to try the cases that really need to be tried. And so when we're making plea offers, what we're able to offer depends largely on the strength of our evidence. A great investigation makes for a really strong plea offer. And also we have to have a victim who is willing and able to testify. And so if you have those two things going together, then, you can drive a pretty hard bargain and get some success that way.
Right.
So that's what we try to do.
Okay.
And then, of course, when we go to trial, we are pretty, we go at it hard, and
Awesome.
we ask for as much as we can get, because by that point, if we have this much evidence and a jury has agreed with us and we've put our victim through the trauma of having to face their abuser in the courtroom, then we're asking for as much as we can get.
That's great. That's what we need, that tough on crime
Oh,
mentality. Yeah. Is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to convey to the voters?
Oh, gosh. Well, I'll throw the question back. As a voter, what questions do you have about a judge?
Sure. I think I've asked a good amount of them. That's what we're looking for, is a good, honest judge that'll keep our streets safe, that'll prioritize the hardest criminals first and get them off the streets and keep our community safe and clean as we can.
Well, that is definitely my goal. Going back to the business community, safe communities make for good property values and a good business environment.
That's right.
I think that's also something that affects the business side.
Big time.
I think that, if someone asked me a question about judicial philosophy, what does judicial philosophy mean? Well, how would I approach cases? Mm-hmm. Well, I believe that judges follow the law. Judges apply the law as it's written. Judges, sometimes there can be somewhat of a gray area, and they have to apply common sense to making those decisions. Mm-hmm. I also believe that judges are public servants. Judges are not kings; they're public servants. As public servants, they have an obligation to be courteous to the parties and to the attorneys. I believe that judges should be prepared when the parties come to court. I believe the judge should have, read up on what they're there to talk about that day. Those are some things that I like to see in judges, especially, all the different places I've practiced.
Okay. That's
something that I like to see. Someone asked me about, what would I be like in the courtroom? And I'm generally, I think, I try to stay calm. I try to stay even-tempered. I try to stay very neutral, because sometimes things can get really heated.
Sure.
But I always go back to what I heard the warden from Angola prison say. He said, "I'll be as nice as you let me, or as mean as you make me."
That's right.
And I think that's actually a pretty good philosophy. Treat everybody as nice as you can, but, a judge has to keep control of the courtroom. And if things get a little unruly, then the judge has to step up.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for being here today. Is there any last things you want to say to the voters before we wrap up?
Well, please vote on May 19th. I hope you will vote for me, but whoever you vote for, just please vote. There are people who have bled and died for our right to vote, and I hope everyone out there will educate themselves on all of the candidates and come to the polls and exercise that right to vote to protect our democracy.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your public service. And as a business owner, we definitely appreciate all our law enforcement, judges, DA's office, because it helps keep us safe and our families safe so we can focus on what we need to focus on.
Well, I agree completely.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristi.
Thank you.